Welcome to the Madison City Council meeting. Today is Tuesday, January the 18th. We have a great agenda tonight. We're going to got special guests here. I'll introduce here in just a second, but we'll start off the meeting with the rising and removing our hats and reciting the Lord's Prayer, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and glory, forever. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the
flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk, may we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Kavanaugh? Here. Krebs?
Here.
Lucy Patillo?
Here.
Rampy?
Here.
Chatham?
Here.
Bartlett?
Here.
Dan DeToe?
Here.
Council, have you had an opportunity to review the minutes from the last meeting, January the 4th? We'll entertain a motion to approve minutes or amendment.
I move to approve the minutes as presented.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. All right. Well, we want to start tonight off with recognizing that January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And we have some special guests tonight who are involved in community safety, and we want to recognize them, but also read a proclamation. In a minute, I'll invite Chief Wallace up to give some remarks, as well as our prosecutor, David Sutter, and of course, any of the other law enforcement officers who would like to make some remarks are welcome to do so. But I'd like to introduce Sheriff Thomas, Prosecutor David Sutter, Detective Kyle Cutshaw, Detective Ricky Harris, Judge Blaine Good, Town Marshal Shane Caldwell, and unfortunately, the Honorable Judge Moak cannot be here tonight. But anyway, good program, and Chief, I'll turn it over to you and say a few words.
Evening, Council. As you well know, and from our previous years and in our dedication to our children and the safety of our community, our Operation Predator Net has obviously went very well. We had 22 arrests, and we are going to give you an update tonight on where we currently stand with the ones that have been convicted in trials or the ones that have taken guilty pleas. So we do have a little video of the ones that have pled guilty or have been convicted. And I will ask Detective Harris to step forward. He's going to read some information to you and give you an update on where we stand. Detective Harris.
So, Predator Net resulted in 22 arrests. Those charges ranged from attempted sexual misconduct with minors, possession of child pornography, various drug charges. Of those 22, 14 have been concluded in court. Right now, we're standing at a total of 90 years prison time between the 14. 8 cases are still pending. 2 are still awaiting their sentence. I'm not going to read all the names here, but here's the cases that have been concluded and the amount of their sentences. So that program was very successful for the police department, and we actually got a lot of attention from other departments. They called us, asked questions about how we set up the operation, how they could do it themselves. And then we actually were invited to join the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, which is made up of federal and state investigators. There are 5,400 members, and the benefits that that's providing to us is that when social media applications or internet providers, pretty much any large company, any app on your phone, they have algorithms to detect child sexual abuse material, child pornography. When that's detected, a cyber tip is generated, which goes to a federal task force that will locate the general geographic area of where that image originated, and then they'll be divided out amongst the investigators in those areas. So we've actually been a member for not even a year. We've already had 4 cyber tips originating from Jefferson County. One of those we did is a joint investigation with the state police, ICAC investigators, that resulted in the arrest of an adult on charges of child molestation and child pornography. That was in July of 2021. And actually just last week we concluded our second successful ICAC case that resulted in a Madison man being charged with child pornography. And that was generated by a cyber tip from an internet service provider. So it's a pretty cool program, and we're glad to be a part of it. We're going to continue to work with the task force, and they actually, at no cost to us, they're providing our detectives with some additional training in the specialized field of digital investigations. MPD remains committed to the investigations of crimes against children. We put a lot of effort into it. There's no more innocent a victim than a child, and us being invited and joining the ICAC task force has greatly enhanced our ability to investigate these types of crimes.
Anybody have any questions for the detectives or prosecutor?
I'd like to invite David Prosecutor to make some remarks to it.
Just like to say, real quick, I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize Detective Scudder, who cannot be here with us tonight. He's working with an illness, and he's progressing well. We're glad to say that. But he was very instrumental in getting this going. It was actually kind of his baby, kind of his idea to start this, to see where it went. When we started, we had no idea what would come out of it. But what came out of it was very alarming. How many people are actually out there preying on our children, and to take these individuals off the streets and to put them where they belong. There's probably nothing more satisfying in my law enforcement career that I've been a part of than this operation. These guys did a remarkable job. It was a non-stop operation for months, and we put sexual predators where they belong, and that's behind bars. We'll never know, and these guys will never know how many kids they have saved from being victims of these sick individuals, but I can assure you it's quite a few. Unfortunately, when they do get to our kids and they do violate it, it's a life sentence for them in one way, shape, or form. So to be preventive and to get out front and to be proactive, it was quite the operation. So I can't thank these guys enough. They just did a remarkable job. And I said, we'll never know how many impacts that they made on innocent life, but it was quite good.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for inviting me here tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to come before you all. I'm going to be echoing a lot of what's been said already, but I do want to make a point to thank you all for your commitment to law enforcement here in our community. So it wasn't that long ago, I think, when the City of Madison Police Department had at one point 1 working detective, and I think the fact that there are now 4 allowed this investigation to happen. So this was maybe a month or 2 into when Sean Scudder was promoted to being a detective, and having the number of detectives in the department, I think, is what really allowed this investigation to happen. So Detective Harris went through a lot of the cases that we, have concluded. There are some more that we'll be able to talk about hopefully here in a bit once the others that are still pending get concluded. But one thing that Ricky talked about, joining ITAC, the good thing about this predator net investigation, and we can thank our state legislature for how they've written some of these statutes, it allowed them to do this without a child essentially being in danger, right? So these were, people communicating with what they certainly believed to be a 14-year-old girl, but obviously, as you can see, right, that these, these were detectives in their 30s that, were communicating with, with these folks through this profile. The unfortunate part about, being able to join ITAC and seeing all the tips that come in are, it has led to cases involving children here in our community. So while it's certainly very positive that we can, use these tips and prosecute these people for these crimes, like Chief Wallace said, these are life sentences for these kids. unfortunately, when I saw some of the names of one of the larger cases that stem from this ITAC investigation with ISP and the City of Madison Police Department, these were kids that we've already seen, kids we've seen in our juvenile probation system that unfortunately were, I hate to say it like this, but easy targets to people preying online. And one thing we've seen with the use of this, these profiles that MPD was operating through Facebook, it was alarming, I think, was what Chief Wallace was talking about, right? The number of people that reached out to what they believed to be a 14-year-old girl. So again, I just want to kind of reiterate, the thanks to you all for making this possible, for the mayor for, committing the resources necessary in order for these investigations to be done. It has been a huge help. And I want to also recognize, all of the officers that were involved, not just the detectives, but I think at some point everyone from the department was either involved in the apprehension and, the planning, bringing folks to the jail after they were met here by law enforcement when they thought they were here to meet the 14-year-old girls. But it wasn't just that investigation, right? So it was time and time again coming in to meet with us, preparing to go to trial, preparing for hearings, coming to sentencing hearings. It's an ongoing process that's been going on for years, and hats off to everyone involved in this. But these investigations and how they were conducted made it easy for us to prosecute, and we look forward to bringing the remaining folks here to justice. But again, wanted to say thanks to you all, thanks to the mayor, chief, detectives, judges. But we could not do it without you. So thank you all so much.
David, I just have just a couple comments, and that is, why do we not talk about trafficking enough? I know this is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and I'm glad we're doing it. Some research that I've done indicates that there's a prevalence of human trafficking even in the state of Indiana, and that it affects all 92 counties. And some statistics from the Indiana Trafficking Victim Assistance Program, indicates that Indiana is 21st in the country with regards to tips and complaints coming through the human trafficking hotline that they follow leads upon. So are we doing as much as we can be doing? What more should we be doing? And again, it's too bad that this is so prevalent in our society.
Yeah, I think, to answer some of this, I think when people kind of have these images in their head of what human trafficking is, sometimes you conjure up these images of like movies like Taken or things that are, in reality, when you look at even these specific cases, so not talking about, individual cases in and of themselves, but, in addition to coming to meet what they believe to be a 14-year-old girl for sex, numerous individuals brought drugs that they intended to, use with what they believe to be a child. Sex toys, weapons, including guns, knives, there were handcuffs, zip ties. And so I think when people have some of these like almost Hollywood images of what human trafficking is versus what we see here in a local community, I think the best way for us to continue to combat this is with proactive investigations like this. I mean, people are out there. I think the furthest distance someone actually traveled to come here was Michigan, right? So someone's coming hours from Michigan. People are coming from, all over the state of Indiana, from driving hours and making kind of detailed arrangements. So I think being able to be proactive, which the legislature has allowed us to do with the way the statutes are written, is going to continue to be helpful. But I think also things like this are important to raise awareness, right? I think, I have an opportunity to have a radio program we, talked with AJ Bramer a lot about on some of these things. Is parents have got to monitor what kids are doing on social media. All of these cases here and the tips that come in, I mean, Facebook is used predominantly, things like Snapchat, but I think it's really important for everyone as a community, right, to have these conversations with your children and say, look, we need to, not like you want to be all up in the business and be nosy about what you're doing, but say, we need to be aware of what you're doing on social media, because, it was kind of staggering when these guys even just set up their profiles, the number of people that just requested them. And some of the things that we've been doing in sentencing hearings when we, are making these arguments to judges are, look at just the friends list of some of these individuals. They're all like 14-year-old girl profiles. So I think what people are doing are casting a wide net, right? And trying to befriend people that they believe to be, teenagers, and are just sending a lot of messages out. So I think constantly staying on top and having those conversations in schools, right, with with children to say, we need to be careful what we're doing on social media, and then continuing to do proactive investigations.
And according to the FBI, this is a $150 billion annual industry. I mean, it is tremendously influenced by cash. But tonight, what I want to certainly recognize is all of your all's contributions in keeping our community safe. I mean, here we have assembled the entire apparatus of our public safety team, which is not just police, but investigation resources, chief obviously, prosecutor, judges, everybody is working toward the same goal, which is to keep our children and our community safe. So we wanted to recognize each of you tonight, and I have a proclamation I want to read, but I'd like to maybe ask each of you maybe to stand up here, and I'd invite Katie to come down, and as I read the proclamation, if you wouldn't mind giving each of our guests tonight a special recognition award for your outstanding service to our community. Over here, I'm going to read the proclamation. So, January is National Human Trafficking Awareness and Prevention Month. Whereas human trafficking is a nationwide public health and civil rights crisis. The victims and survivors are everywhere, with Madison being no exception. Whereas human trafficking includes both labor and sex trafficking, with both international and domestic victims. Anyone can become a victim of trafficking. While women and girls are the primary victims and survivors come from every background, race, gender, sexual orientation, and economic status. Traffickers target individuals for any reason, and they are vulnerable, particularly those who are vulnerable. Young people are particularly vulnerable to trafficking and exploitation, but face many barriers in reporting what has happened to them. Indiana's safe harbor law recognizes that any youth under the age of 18 who comes forward will be directed towards specialized providers to receive comprehensive and trauma-informed services. Safe Harbor also seeks to provide communities across Indiana with the knowledge, skills, and resources to effectively identify and work with sexually exploited and at-risk youth. Whereas all communities must seek to prevent human trafficking before it can occur by promoting safe, healthy, and supportive environments. The City of Madison is striving to become a place where human trafficking does not exist, where people have opportunities available to them, and where all people are treated as fully humane and worthy of a supportive community and freedom. Now therefore be it resolved, the City of Madison declares January as Human Trafficking Awareness Prevention Month, setting our seal at the City of Madison today, January 18th, 2022. So gentlemen, thank you so much for all you are doing to keep our community safe. And so again, I'll tell you how much we appreciate you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Mayor.
While it's not a requirement, you can stay for the rest of the meeting. We have some very exciting information to share with all of you about parking. And next up, I would like to introduce Nicole Schell, the Director of our Building and Planning, and she will introduce HWC, which was engaged last year to prepare a comprehensive parking study analysis of our downtown parking needs. This was paid for by the City of Madison Redevelopment Commission. Preliminary results were shared with them, and we would like to invite HWC to share a final parking study presentation to council. Nicole?
Yeah, so like the mayor said, we hired HWC Engineering from Indianapolis to help us with our parking study. They also did the sidewalk survey that was completed last year. So at this time, I'd like to invite Kevin up. He's going to do the presentation and answer any questions.
Well, the pointer is that one. Yes, sir. There is, but it won't show up on the screen.
Thank you, Nicole. And thank you all for your time tonight. I appreciate it. Again, my name is Kevin Seneger. I'm with HWC Engineering. And I wanted to kind of
give you a quick summary of the parking study that we've been working on with the city for the last couple, 3 months now in doing this. So I'm going to try and get through about a 75-page document in about 15 minutes. So bear with me if I start going a little fast. Just raise your hand, throw something at me, and I'll slow down. And you can, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Again, this parking study was undertaken by the city to try to really just get a baseline of information about current parking conditions in the downtown area. Really an inventory of what's happening and using that real world data that we've generated to really understand what's happening in the downtown. There's anecdotal stories of people not finding parking and people saying not enough parking, so the city wanted to come in and actually do a study to come in and figure out exactly how much parking there is, how it's being utilized, and ways that we can try and address some of the issues that there are. So how this took place was actually pretty interesting. It was my first time dealing with having they had one of our engineers come down to fly a drone over the downtown for over a 3-day period in October. And this happened between 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. And basically on the hour, it would fly the downtown, and I'll kind of go to the next slide there. Essentially, the study area included from 1st Street on the south side up to 3rd, and then from Walnut Street to Broadway, going east to west. And so that drone flew over every hour for that, 11 a.m. to 6 p.m., taking pictures along the way of aerial photographs of the existing parking conditions of the downtown itself. So we took that information and stitched it all together and then put together these maps and just kind of give you a sense of the utilization that was what was happening. So we did a little quiz when we had our last meeting about how many parking spaces. We kind of gave it away now, but there are total in that area of about 1,600 parking spaces. Does that surprise people? Does that sound, yeah? Any idea?
Everyone I've talked with is very surprised. Very surprised.
That's both on-street and off-street parking. So most of that was the off-street spaces, which again at the time of the study, it was when Main Street was just getting repaved, hadn't been striped yet, but what we had one of our technicians doing was essentially doing measurements to kind of lay out what those parking spaces would be to kind of get a sense of what those spaces were. And then you can kind of see how they were distributed throughout the downtown. So overall, for the downtown parking of that 1,600 spaces, over that 3-day period, the average utilization rate was about 45%. So less than half of the spaces were being used, again, over that 3-day period, which was on a Thursday, Friday, and a Saturday. It peaked at about 54%, and that was on Saturday at 3 o'clock. And if I recall correctly, there was an event going on, I think maybe commemorating the new mural that was on that Mulberry 2nd Street, maybe. So that may have had a factor in that high rate. And that last, you can't see, the last bullet there was that 85% utilization rate. That is typically considered in the parking industry standards, researchers, and experts in downtown development. That is sort of the gold standard of what they would want to see as far as parking being utilized in the downtown area. 85% of your spaces being used. And that would include turnover rate and those types of things. So I want you to kind of keep that number in mind as you look through that. And you can kind of see there, that red line is that 85% compared, so that the blue graph below is that utilization rate over the 3-day period, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And there again, you can see where it peaked on that Saturday at 3. Well, what does that look like when you distribute that through that study area in the downtown? Really what we saw was really the central core there at Main, 1st Street, and then from west to Mulberry. That really was a high concentration both on-street and then in the off-street parking as well. That was consistent throughout. So we had about 24 different images of this showing the different rates, and that's in the document itself in the appendix to kind of show how those parking amounts were distributed throughout the downtown over that time period. I think it's worth noting that one of the concerns the mayor brought up, and Nicole, was concerns about possibly some of the conflicting parking along some of the residential streets, along 1st and 3rd Street. We really didn't see a lot of that in our 3-day study, which was kind of good. So you didn't have these conflicts of business patrons parking where residents were trying to park and that kind of thing. So again, during that 3-day period, we didn't really see a lot of that. On Main Street, and we're going to kind of break down some of these stats a little bit more. So off-street parking, again, is about a little over 636 spaces. Utilization was about 43%. Again, this is off-street, both public and private parking lots. Of the city's 5 public parking lots, they contain 222 spaces. This is including the city lot behind us. It's the other 5 lots. That average rate was about 56%. So it's getting a little higher, but still, you're barely using half. And then of the 19 privately owned parking spaces, it kind of gets cut off down at the bottom, but that utilization rate was only at about 39% for the private lots in the study area itself. So again, you can kind of see the blue line, real world utilization versus that target of 85%. So based on this, we did go ahead and look at some of the more specific areas, looking at each of the public lots. This is Main and Poplar, probably the busiest of all, as you can probably imagine. It's the most obvious for visitors and residents that are traveling along Main Street. That average utilization rate was up at 87%. So that was getting to that point where you're having that parking lot nearly full most days, or at least during this 3-day period. Which was, it's good, but I think it's worth noting that one of the things we did talk about was the issue of all-day parking, and whether it's employee parking or residence parking. We did go back and literally look at the different times of day on this Friday, and started to notice where there were cars parked during the entire time during that day. I think that's leading to some of the capacity issues that are just people being parked there all day. We didn't look at the other areas, but I think considering this is one of the more high-profile areas, it's probably one that has the most effect for visitors trying to find a place to park. Second in Mulberry Street, again, probably the second most utilized of the parking spaces of the city lots, about 72% average for the 3-day period. And again, you can see it's really kind of great to see this in real time. How the parking lot was closed during most of Saturday for that the event, and then when the parking lot opened up the rest of the way, you can see where that kind of shot back up to being near capacity. So again, one of the more heavily utilized lots in the central core there that we've been talking about. And you can also see there along Mulberry Street, it's fairly heavy, a lot of parking because it was blocked off for part of the day. People that parked there along Mulberry. And then the third one that we had looked at, high profile one, which actually isn't, was the second in Jefferson Street, probably the most underutilized of the lots. It averaged about 20% utilization for that 3-day period. Really, it just trying to understand a little bit more why that is, but I think in talking with Nicole and the mayor and we're looking through some of the issues, I think it's really just a way of improving signage and wayfinding, which we'll get to here in a minute, to try and increase the utilization of that lot.
That's probably the largest lot.
It is,
right?
yes.
Right.
Thank you for bringing that up. It is 84 spaces. I'm sorry, I should go back and look at that. Yeah, 84 spaces. The Mulberry Street lot had 54 spaces. So this is the largest of the lots and is currently under capacity and underutilized. So there needs to look at opportunities and start to better use that lot. Thanks for bringing that up. And then we did then go into looking at off-street parking as well. Again, 967 spaces, give or take a few. That averaged about 47% utilization rate, and it peaked at about 58%. Main Street, from Walnut to Broadway, about 130 spaces, give or take. That included loading zones and the handicapped ADA spaces as well. And that averaged at about, double check my notes here before I speak. It peaked at about 68%, and then it averaged about 56%. So again, it didn't vary a whole lot, but it may have had to do with the fact that it was being repaid and wasn't striped. So what does this kind of tell us? I think one of the key findings is there seems to be sufficient parking capacity in the downtown, which hopefully may surprise some, not others, but with that 3-day average of about 45%, you're well below that 80-85% that they start to look at as far as what that utilization rate is. The Main Street lot, along with the Mulberry Street, most active, most used. The 3rd Street lot, which we call the 3rd Street lot, a little smaller lot, but it was utilized on a number of different reasons, but that was heavily utilized as well. There seemed to be, where there was, we like to say, when there was an area of reaching capacity, whether it was along the street or in one of the public lots, you could easily go a half a block or a block in any direction and find a place to park. It seemed to be the case. For instance, as I was down here a little bit early today, I drove through some of the lots, just checking things out in a curious way. The Mulberry Street was probably close to, I would guess, 80-90% full when I drove through it. But as soon as I pulled back out on the Mulberry Street, either side of the street, there were probably 6 to 8 spaces that you could park on the street if you were wanting to stay in that area. So that's kind of what we were looking at there. Is really, it's just a question of how close do you need to be? Do you need to be right outside the business to access a parking space, or can you walk half a block or so? So I think one of the other key findings is the fact that right now the downtown has free parking throughout, on street, off street, whatever the case may be. So we're not looking to really go the other extreme and looking at paid parking or a parking structure or anything like that. I think we're just trying to move the needle a little bit to start looking at still having the free parking, but maybe including some better signage and wayfinding, so ways that people can better utilize some of the underutilized parking spots, mainly at Jefferson Street. So that was really probably one of the key findings that we wanted to kind of make with this. And I think, we throw out numbers as far as how much parking structure costs. I don't think this really warrants that at this point. We're spending $20,000 to $25,000 per spot to go to a parking garage. It's probably not there yet. So some of the key findings that we do want to came out of this, we want to talk about really the 3 main things: more of an informational strategy, looking at visitor priority strategy, and that's not to the detriment of residents and others living down here, working, and then looking at capacity strategy. And those are the 3 key points that we wanted to make as far as these recommendations. So as far as the informational aspects of it, looking at both web-based and real-world, including signage on the streets. How can we start to update the municipal website, the City of Madison's website, Visit Madison website, so you can start to, so a visitor on their way in downtown, pull up their phone like my kids do, my wife does when we're traveling, is figure out where they want to go, and is there parking nearby, that type of thing. Some examples there, I pulled up the City of Columbus on their website. I think it was 2 clicks, and you could go to their downtown map and click on a map PDF to show you where parking is. It could be as simple as that. Another one I found out for you. There's numerous examples of where you can start to pull up that information and using it through Google or Apple virtual maps and that type of stuff. Updating expanding your informational signage that you have now. There's some good signage in the downtown area. I think one thing to start to look at is how you can start to add to that and include additional parking information as far as where the public parking is located, as well as directional signage, wayfinding signage at key intersections. And I think in this slide here, you can kind of see the light blue asterisks are essentially sort of some recommendations on placement of wayfinding signs. So that essentially is telling the motorist this way to public parking, sort of directing them one way or the other. And then the dark blue are the public parking signs saying, "You've arrived, here's where you can park." And there's a few of the places in downtown. I know, oddly enough, the public lot at Jefferson and 2nd Street has some public parking signs, but that's one of the more underutilized sites. And I think one of the key issues there is including some wayfinding signage, maybe there at Jefferson and Main Street, to sort of say, hey people, head this direction right here, and you got an 84 space lot that you can park at. So I think those are some fairly simple measures that can be done to improve the utilization of some of those lots. And then as far as visitor strategy, is looking at prioritizing visitor use of what we've called the kind of premium lots. They're Main and Poplar Street lot, and then at 2nd and Mulberry, where you maybe start to look at phasing in some parking controls, whether it's a 2-hour time limit or 3-hour time limit, just to post the signs, not necessarily always enforcing it, but at least for visitors, that gives them that sort of that trigger in their head that, okay, I can't stay here all day necessarily. So you get that turnover that businesses like as far as new cars coming in and others leaving or moving and that type of thing. And then looking at secondary lots for both public on-street parking and public off-street lots, 2nd and Jefferson Street, and better utilizing Broadway Street with some striping and other ways that you can improve signage to get people parking on in those areas as well. Again, not a lot of costs involved, just with some signage and some painting, striping city streets would do the trick. And here again on the left, you can see sort of that language that's developed for wayfinding signage for parking, public parking. You can start to make it consistent, make it memorable, and make sure that people, it's understandable as to where they can park. And then the visitor priority is another one there, looking at the green areas, looking at those as your primary spots for parking. The Main Street Comfort Station, that lot, looking at some improvements to that, better utilizing that. And then the blue showing along Broadway and Jefferson, those are more of your secondary lots to try and get more of the long-term parkers to use those spots to free up some of those in the central core where you want more of those patrons utilizing those spaces. And then thirdly, looking at just a capacity strategy. As you go through this progression, this third option would then start looking at how do you maybe look at ways to improve parking in the downtown area. And whether that's public-private partnership, where you can start to, partner with the private owners. Again, some of the private lots are in general, total number for all the private lots was like 35% utilization. So again, you can increase the utilization of some of those lots. And there's both benefits to the private owner and to the city. There's maintenance issues that can be shared. Revenues that can be shared, however the case may be, and making some of those available. Possibility of opening up the City Hall parking lot after hours, maybe on weekends, with proper signage. That could be an option as well. And as I mentioned earlier, with the Main Street Comfort Station lot, once making some improvements to that and adding some signage, there's 10, 12 lot spaces in there you could probably use. So every little bit helps as far as adding to that capacity, especially in that central core that we're looking at. And as I said, with any of these recommendations, you're really looking at including the appropriate signage that clearly indicates where you can park, how long you can park, and those types of issues. So those are the main points. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. I have more slides.
I'll just give a little background here, which is, as we were doing our work plans with the redevelopment commission, and we are working on Main Street, we're working on the various different economic development applications and investment across the downtown, and particularly our destination development plans. The question always came up about, well, do we have enough parking? And it was easy to jump to the conclusion, well, like other communities, let's build a $4 million parking garage and let's put it over there. And we weren't sure where we were going to land when we started framing up this initiative. But the surprising outcome of this was how many parking spaces we have in this corridor. And then now we can, rather than leaping to, we need to build a multi-million-dollar parking garage and where that should go, there are, in that progression of solutions that Kevin had identified, we can start with things that don't cost a lot, but are more informational. And that's where the investment ought to be, which is what do we need to change policy-wise? what can we do from, as you characterize as wayfinding with signage. We probably take it for granted when we come into downtown Madison that we know the area, we're familiar with it, let's just go park, and here's where we're gonna park. But visitors and the growth that we're having in tourism, they're coming up in our area, many for the very first time. They're coming into this main corridor, and essentially all they see perhaps is the on-street parking in front of the businesses, and then the lot up here at Poplar Street. And so it seems like there's a lot of things we can do to really maybe create capacity without making a multi-million-dollar investment. And I think that we should spend the next several months really studying policy and some restrictions, as you mentioned, digging into peak times and where those are at, really understanding why the largest parking lot on Jefferson Street is so underutilized. What can we do that essentially avoids a multi-million-dollar investment in a parking structure? So I think there's still a lot of conversations, a lot of information to be taken out of this and analyze this data so that we can make a very informed, wise decision and invest our resources where they need to go. And as you know, we have a very dynamic destination and workforce development, economic development strategy for this year and next year too. So our capital resources are going to be already consumed by lots of other things, but that capital is intended to attract other capital investment. And so we want to promote tourism. We also want to promote economic development and regional destination development with Madison. And I think this is great information that goes along with the other things that we've done, particularly our sidewalk asset management inventory and rating system, so we can figure out where do we apply our human and financial capital investments. And we are open to suggestions. Perhaps this is something that Traffic Committee would want to start digesting along with our new public policy liaison inside the mayor's office. There's good recommendations, I think, that can come from a good group, a good set of eyes, and talking to more people and expanding just the level of engagement. Because as I've talked to people across the community, and often they'll say, we need more parking, I'll ask them, well, how many spaces do you think we have in this area? 300, 400? Like, would you be surprised to learn we have 1,600 spaces? But over the years, and anybody that's grown up here, you know that we've taken out all of our parking meters, so there's no constraints on anybody's parking. We know that we have successfully attracted more businesses, but more residential occupants downtown. And so that's creating some of this capacity question that we have to have, which is how do we manage it? So let's just apply some logical suggestions to perhaps improve it for everybody that lives here, works here, invests here, or visits here in particular. Yeah.
Did you break down how many handicap spots were available within our central business district, or what was that total number?
Yes, and I don't have it in these slides. It's in the study itself. You're going to test my memory. I want to say there were 10 to 12 along Main Street, and beyond that, I'm not sure there are.
I'm just wondering if it's adequate based on the number of spaces.
Yeah.
Are we, inviting and welcoming to those?
Yeah.
Well,
folks that are coming to visit
you raised
as
a
well?
very good point, Councilman, which is our approach to handicap spots is someone will call the chief will investigate it, and he'll come to Board of Public Works and make a
Put one up.
recommendation, and then we put one up, and sometimes
Yeah.
we've got one right next to another one. There's no a methodical approach to assessing our parking needs, and that can be improved.
I think one of the keys to that then also is making sure that you have the ramps necessary that are near
Sure.
those parking spaces as well, and how do you start to make sure those all those happen. I think one point I want to add real quickly as far as the capacity goes is, if you remember, this study area only went down to First Street, so we really didn't include, there's a lot of parking down along Riverfront as well in those spaces. I know a lot of those get used around the park and pool during main events that are like community events that happen. as well as the parking garage that's in the old hospital, which is underutilized. So there's additional capacity beyond the study area that could factor in long term, depending on how things play out, how you start to look at utilization of those spaces.
You know, and I think that's also what's also interesting is the fact that in this corridor, you know, we have fantastic shopping and dining now that's also growing and improving. We have more residents who are living downtown. We have the cultural arts district that is forming, the Madison music movement that's promoting more tourism and pedestrian traffic. We're doing things on Main Street that are promoting more pedestrian activity. Our Ready grant application talked a lot about Madison as a regional destination. So a tremendous amount of capital investments already been made to start pushing us in that direction so we can grow as a community and grow those sectors of our economy. But this is something we've got to address.
Mr. Mayor, can I make one more comment about the handicapped parking?
Sure.
I think there probably is an adequate amount of handicapped parking, but what we need to think about are people who have vans that have side door openings. Many of them open into trees or shrubbery, or don't give adequate space to get out into the car beside you. That's something the city should really look into.
I agree. Again, it all starts with collecting the data and then putting some real eyes on it with the intent of making an improvement and making recommendations, because there's definitely a public policy implication here, which is, okay, now what? Now that we have the data, what do we do with it from a policy perspective? Wayfinding is one thing, but what do we do? What do we do policy-wise? Because there are essentially no restrictions on parking right now, and we do have some complaints in parts of our residential neighborhoods. We've heard a couple of them in our traffic committee meetings with regards to where there's been some encroachment with changes of use in what has traditionally been a residential neighborhood that's now bordering a business or a restaurant or a brewery or an apartment project, and that's creating the need to assess our entire parking policy.
And I think one final point I'll make as far as the free parking, and reading some different studies and the research that's done, is talking about how free parking is actually sort of encourages more demand, more people coming downtown and parking because they think I can jump in my car and head down and park wherever I want. Well, if you sort of start to manage where some of that parking is or put some limitations on it, they'll start to maybe think twice. Maybe they'll hop on their bike or their golf cart and head down and park a little further away and walk. And so those are the kind of considerations. It was pretty interesting. I'll just mention real quick, if you're really into this, I was kind of geeking out over some of this. Donald Shoup has done some great research as far as parking. He's got a great book called The High Cost of Free Parking, and Jeff Speck is another author that talk about the walkable city. So they talk about how parking and impacts urban design in downtowns in negative ways a lot of times, as far as having too much parking where it detracts from the urban setting of downtowns and urban areas.
Good point, and part of what's, Madison's challenge is just the cultural dynamic that we have as we are trying to change and just be more efficient in our use of our space. There's a cultural element to that too that's very different than people are used to. We have to be mindful of that, and we have lots of different constituents. I mean, it's amazing the number of people that will have an opinion on this, because from their perspective, whether they're a business owner, a restaurant owner, a brew pub owner, a musician, a resident, a visitor, an investor, somebody that works downtown, there's a lot of different constituents that will have interesting opinions and insights, and that's why I think that the conversation we're starting here isn't going to end here. It's going to be a broader community-wide conversation with all the stakeholder constituents that we serve across our community. Any more questions for Kevin? They also did our sidewalk asset management inventory and rating system for us, which we've already gotten some great use out of. So
Thank you.
I just want to make one more comment if I
Yep.
could. I just wish that we could have gone maybe a little larger and taken to the new hotel, the cotton mill, and or the housing that used to be the tack factory into consideration, because I think those are the two places I've gotten the most complaints. I don't know if anybody else has had that.
You want to address the data collection aspects of this and why we had to start with a defined area rather than all of downtown?
Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of it, really, I was focused on some of the commercial retail uses focused in the downtown area that we were really focused on at this point. And then I think to your point, I think if we would have seen some very numbers as far as utilization of the downtown, we might have been, I would have been a little more concerned as we were getting all the accurate data of what's happening in the downtown total. But I think because there was such not a great difference between the average utilization rates versus the peaks along there, it seemed fairly steady. I think we could say that was pretty common factor throughout the downtown area. Now you brought up a good point with the hotel. I haven't looked in that area specifically, but I think based on the numbers that we were seeing and the fairly consistent amount of percentages that we were seeing, that would translate into the broader area as well. I think it's one of the things we talked about as
The
well.
data collection was done through drone technology, and it plotted, each space, and that's why. I mean, we had a pretty big data collection area, and when we started trying to frame up what should be the border of our assessment, we tried to get it to a manageable level.
Yeah.
But it was the drone technology that was utilized for collecting the raw data was very expensive.
Very cool, but yeah, it did take, I think it could only fly at 20 minutes at a time, and we had issues with weather. That's why we did it on 2 different weekends, so it was pretty fascinating to kind of be a part of that. But yeah, it brought back some great information, but it did sort of, I don't want to say constrain us, but it did kind of, we maxed out the amount we could use with that drone technology.
And I've not heard that we've had issues with parking sufficiency at the cotton mill. We did have a resident come to our most recent traffic committee talking about, residents down there using on-street parking versus the off-street parking that they have available to them. The challenge always becomes, which is, it's still public parking. And so when you do the developments, you go through the planning stages, that's the time to evaluate the merits of that development and the capacity for off-street parking that they're offering. But we are having a bit of a collision with regards to some of these encroachments, as I mentioned, Councilman, with different uses in areas that had been, frankly, a bit immune to parking problems, because both of those neighborhoods you mentioned, they were abandoned industrial buildings that had sat vacant for decades, and now you've got life back in them, and that's creating a little bit of parking issues.
We met with Fairfield yesterday, and they said they've been at 100% occupancy every weekend, and I haven't heard anything about complaints about parking issues in that area. Is anyone else?
Well, just hearsay at an outing.
Okay.
Someone who lives on the adjacent road.
Okay, St. Michael's.
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
South St. Michael's, so.
And I will say, with the new Fairfield Infield Cotton Mill, the adaptive reuse of that as a preservationist and an urban planner, I know it was a long process getting that thing up and running, but I mean, hats off to you guys for seeing that through and getting that up and going. It's awesome.
Kevin, thank you guys, appreciate it. Thank you all for coming. Okay, we'll move on. We do have 3 resolutions, and we'll ask somebody to come up.
We have 3 resolutions here, all of a similar nature, so I'm going to try to read them all 3 and then we can discuss it. We've got resolution number 2022-5, resolution of the Common Council of the City of Madison, Indiana, transferring certain funds. This is whereas an expense created by COVID-19 pandemic has created extra expenses within the transfer station.
fund is now necessary to transfer certain funds among the original appropriations. So that's $236,000, $479, or $479.12 from rainy day to TSO. We have another one here, whereas the 2022 annual budget included funds appropriated in various budget line items to be set aside for the 50/50 match requirements for community crossings. Matching grant funds is now necessary to transfer those certain funds from the original appropriations into the local road and bridge matching grant fund in order to pay for their services. And so it's essentially, you can see there the total of $602,000 transferred over to the local road and bridge matching grant fund. And the third, which is number 7, resolution of the Common Council of the City of Madison, Indiana, transferring certain funds, whereas the 2022 annual adopted budget includes funds appropriated in the county tax fund, and whereas those funds are now intended for the purpose of funding the historic district grant program known as PACE, it is now necessary to transfer those funds from the original appropriations into the PACE fund for the year 2022 for the program operation. And that is $120,000 from the historic district grant program to the PACE NRO.
Council, I know you thought we were done with transfers. We wrapped up 21 transfers to clean up the budget, but wanted to get a head start on 2022. So when you are helping us do budget in the summer and you make appropriations, some of those are for the PACE funds, some are for matching grant monies. They're not in the budget within where we work, where we pay those out of. So they need to be transferred every year into that fund. So the PACE one is self-explanatory. Those are PACE dollars we want to get into the PACE fund so that Nicole can use those to fund her program. And the CCMG is also self-explanatory. Those are the funds we use to match state money to get our road projects done. So the one I wanted to speak with you about is TSO, because you're probably not used to hearing much about TSO. That stands for our transfer station operating budget. That is our up on the hilltop, the transfer station where we take the trash and recycling, and homeowners take their debris. So that fund is not an appropriated account. You guys don't, we don't set aside money for that account. It is operated out of revenue that is generated from the operation of the transfer station. So the basic fact is there's not enough revenue from the transfer station to fund the different operational costs that we have for it. COVID affected us a great deal with the amount of debris that was being taken to the transfer station by private residents. Everybody was home. Everybody was cleaning out their garages and doing home projects, building decks, and all of that stuff. All of that debris went to the TSO. The flood in June of last year, we took, I'm sorry, Mayor, 160 tons of debris from the flooded area to the transfer station at no charge. We have had an increase in salary costs because of trying to compete for workers. So we had operated at a negative basically for that. We want to reimburse the transfer station and get them back to an even number so that this year as we go through operations we can keep a better eye on it and make sure that we try to get them operating at a net at least so that we're not negative. Wanted to also just take a moment to mention that we took a 40% increase from Rumpke in April of 2020 for trash rates. We have not passed that along. We have absorbed that cost. So in addition to the amount of increase, all the additional debris and trash that went up there, we took on all of that, the additional cost for that. So happy to take any questions on it, but wanted to give you a little bit of an explanation as to why that account was so far in the negative.
So is it safe to, is it safe to say that just like water rates, that there needs to be a trash rate study and
Yes.
address that
Absolutely.
as we've taken on some pretty significant increase.
That-
And I assume that also a factor is we didn't have the DOC to help pick up trash, so we paid more to have trash
That's
picked
correct.
up, right?
That's correct. You remember that we transferred the DOC funds at the end of last year, put it into rainy day. You know, this is one of those things that's gonna help to pay for the staff that we had to pay to go do some of the things that DOC took care of for us.
When was that last trash study? Do we know?
We started, actually, I think the last rates at the TSO were probably 2014, increased in 2014.
That sounds right. And we have started a trash study, to be honest with
Is
you.
that-
We put it on hold. We put it on hold because when COVID hit, and you know, we're talking about water rates as well, so we thought we'll just put that on hold for right now. And, but we are gonna have to pick it back up and we are gonna have to finish the conversation.
That's an operation that's completely dependent upon user fees, like our water utility. As Mindy had mentioned, we have highly rising costs for fuel, rising costs for labor, 40% increase that's been passed along to us that we've absorbed from Rumpke. We did the trash removal for the flood relief. We also waived all the trash fees for 6 months for almost 30 residents who live down there as additional flood relief to help them recover. And there's a cumulative impact to all of that eventually we will have to address, because right now we're okay. We have money in rainy day. We also could use ARP money because the final Treasury regulations came out a week or two ago that literally lifted virtually all of the handcuffs on that money for recipients of $10 million or less, essentially declaring that any unit of government across the country that received $10 million or less is assumed to have had a revenue loss due to COVID equal to the amount of ARP money that they're receiving. Our ARP money that we brought through with our local plans and adopted is about $2.4 million. And we haven't used much of that because we are investing the majority of that in our flood mitigation planning. So we need to, you know, when COVID hit, and then we had the shutdowns, and then we had an unemployment over 20%, we weren't in a position to raise rates at that time. So we've been carrying it. And then a year later, continuing to work through COVID and dozens of executive orders, we had the flood. And then for the last 8 months, we've been working on our water project. So as we wind down on the water, I say wind down to a certain extent on the study part of it, we'll have to pick this back up and correct the deficiencies that we're experiencing for trash, recycling, and compost removal. And I'll emphasize this, right now our cost structure is $2.46 a household per week. That's very, very inexpensive. We can't absorb all the costs through inflation, and with our third-party providers, we'll have to make an adjustment with trash rates. If they just, again, part of the problems with anything that we do that requires user fees is we can't change rates very easily or inexpensively. Generally, it's going to require time and money for a study. It's going to require ordinance work before it gets implemented. There's nothing easy about working with the state statutes on changing our utility rates.
Was the transfer station operating at a loss prior to the start of COVID?
They have been, well, I don't have a long history of it, but I know that when the rate increase happened in 2020, there was a negative balance, but it was only more like 20 or 40,000 at the end of 2020. So we again made a transfer and zeroed that out, but this one is significantly more. The number that I went through 2020's full year report and compared it to the 2021 full year report, just the increase to Rumpke was over $80,000.
We remove thousands of tons a year of trash, curbside trash and recycling. impact to all of this, which is the longer we wait to raise our trash rates, the more of this we have to absorb. And we're okay for now, but it's not free. Trash removal isn't free, and it's very inexpensive relative to our cost structure. Trash compactor trucks are very, very expensive. In order to get Rumpke's increase down to 40%, we had to agree to make an investment in our transfer station operation, which is also costing us a couple $100,000 because we had to do some. Because what they want to do in order to keep the cost down is be able to remove more trash, more tons of trash at a time, because they're hauling it off to process. So there was a capital investment that we had to make. They also made about $1 million capital investment to our transfer station. All of that was to get our rates down from doubling to about 40% increase.
What was, for last year, after the Rumpke increase, what was the other most considerable cost increase?
Fuel, I'd say fuel.
On labor too.
But
Yeah.
it's got to be labor because you didn't have the
Labor.
DOC picking up.
Labor.
So you went from,
Not all of our labor is costed through the TSO. It is mostly for operation of the TSO, but we've had to shuffle people around a lot.
It's pretty remarkable that in a time like what we've been going through for going on the third year now, we've not had any interruption in our services, but there has been a cost to it. And there's an opportunity cost here, because this is money now that we'll have to take out of rainy day that otherwise was going to be invested in a road or a sidewalk project, or matching money for some other grant that we would be receiving. This is a temporary fix. We've also got to get through the major investment that we have to make for water, which is, as we've been talking about, the $13 million project. And we'll have to circle back eventually. We're okay for now, as long as we make these transfers. We got enough money to cover it. But we'll have to ask ourselves the question, which is, how much can we continue to absorb for how many years to offset these increased costs that we are incurring?
So, with all that being said, we do need a motion and a second.
I move that we approve resolutions 2022-05, 2022-06, and 2022-07 as presented.
Second that motion?
Is there any further discussion from the council? Any discussion or comments from the public? Seeing none, we'll take a roll call vote on all three of those resolutions.
Dan DiTillo?
Yes.
Chatham?
Yes.
Bartlett?
Yes.
Rampy?
Yes.
Lucy DiTillo?
Yes.
Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Krebs?
Yes.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you, Council. All right, moving on the agenda, we have before you some additional board appointments. We're still working to fulfill all of the volunteer membership of our over 24 boards and committees. In front of you are recommendations for 2 appointments to the tree board, Glenn Schulte and Terry Adler, 1 appointment to the newly formed Public Arts Commission, Tracy Wine, and then for note purposes, Lisa Ferguson is joining our PACE committee. So is Steve O'Rear, that's not on here. And then the last one, which we would also need your kind of consent to, is the Riverfront Alcohol Permit Committee. We have our Economic Development Director as an assigned member of that committee, and Tony Steinhardt is now our new Director of Economic Development. So Tree Board, Public Arts, and Riverfront Alcohol Permit Committee, like to ask council to move to approve those appointments.
I move that we approve those appointments as stated.
A second.
All in favor, signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you.
Mayor, we have an appointment we'd like to make as council to Jefferson County Board of Tourism.
Okay.
I move that we approve Ron Bateman to the Jefferson County Board of Tourism to fill I believe it's our last seat to represent the lodging for that Outboard.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Hearing none, any questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Two very important boards, VMI and JCBT, good membership on both. I appreciate all the effort that you guys are making to steer that. Tremendous progress in the last 18 months, so thank you both. I know several of you were involved in that. Jim, you're about to get involved in it, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Anything else on board appointments, council? All right, we have reports of city officials tonight. We'll start with Deputy Mayor Mindy McGee.
Good evening. Just a quick update from me tonight. Wanted to let you know that we opened bids for it's actually our fall 21 CCMG road paving project last week. We had 5 companies that bid on that job, and you remember this is the Oak Hill job. And the bids varied quite a bit. So we had bids from anywhere from $1.5 million to $2.5 million on that project. So we went through a pretty extensive review. We had our engineers review it. I had Joe Jenner review it from the legal side, and Kenny Washer, our sort of resident road expert, take a look at it, just to make sure we weren't missing anything. Didn't want to award a low bid that was going to come back and bite us later on in the project. So we all feel good about it. Just a couple of notes from the engineers on that. Because we're doing the project the way we are, within one neighborhood, complete and total revamp, the companies are able to bring their equipment in, drop it, do their work, and pull it out. So the winning bid came from a company that gave us very low cost on mobilization and demobilization for that reason. We were hoping when we were talking about doing the jobs this way that would make a difference, and it appears that it has. And this company had purchased a new piece of equipment that allows them to do sidewalks and curbs very easily just by driving it through. So they were able to bid a much lower cost on the curb part of the project. And then they picked up that we had already accounted for some concrete. Because we're doing total sidewalk replacement, they didn't need to account for that in the ADA curb ramp pieces. So, and they were the only firm to take that into account. So their bid was the lowest at $1.534, and that was from All Star Paving. Earlier today at the Board of Public Works and Safety meeting, I recommended to the board that they accept that bid, and they did so. So we will begin working on a contract, and then we hope this project will start first to mid-April when the asphalt plants open back up. And I am working in the meantime to have a conversation with residents through a letter to let residents and homeowners know what's getting ready to happen in their neighborhood. We would like to schedule a groundbreaking up there before that project starts, so we'll invite all of you to attend that. I would like to get some drawings done of the park and various pieces of this project that they can see the transformation that's gonna take place in their neighborhood. And then we're talking about some other improvements in terms of street lamps and obviously the park renovation too. So we're gonna start working on some capital planning from that side. But thank you for your support on that. This is the first time we've really looked at doing road paving this way, and I think it'll be transformational for this neighborhood. So I appreciate your support.
Quick question, is the water department gonna take a good look at the ground?
They certainly are. Yeah, I say that in every meeting and every staff meeting to Brian Jackson, that we're gonna sit down and talk about what's underground while we're milling anything that looks like it needs to be replaced. So hopefully he's got his budget in order to do any underground work that needs to happen. Thank you.
Fresh asphalt is like catnip for our work.
What was our awarded number that we were awarded for CCMG? Was it right at 900,000 or something like that?
Yes, it was just under $1 million. So we were expecting this job to be around $2 million, and it would have cost us, $1 million, all of our matching funds for the year. So coming in under gives us a little bit of room. So our match will now be $767,000.
Okay.
So that's a nice little bit of breathing room for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good deal. committee. Nicole?
I'll also just give a quick update, but I gave you a more in-depth summary. So I'm just going to do a 2021 overview. Our office is in the process of transitioning to iWork, which is an online permitting system that both the county and Hanover are using. We're hoping to go live with that in February. We had hoped it'd be in January, but they're a little behind getting all of us on. So hopefully that will go live. That will give the public access to our office online, be able to submit building permits online, applications, even nuisance complaints. For 2021 building permits, we issued 151 building permits. That totals just over $73 million in construction costs. Our zoning board reviewed 38 applications and 103 renewals, approved 73 of those. Our plan commission reviewed 29 applications and approved 18 of those. Nuisance office, we recently hired a full-time code enforcement officer. He started at the beginning of the year, so we're hoping that the 2021 numbers will be different, but we reviewed 83 nuisance cases and 17 were abated by the city. The rest were abated by the homeowner. Historic board reviewed 164 applications and approved 149. Case reviewed 52 applications, and that totals out to over $2 million of property owner funds that were matched by $590,000 by the city and county. We've got a lot of projects in the works. We're updating the historic district survey and historic district guidelines, and we are of course working on the parking study, finishing that up, working on the park master plan, and a couple other gateway improvement projects. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Offhand, do you know the number of historic board applications that were approved with the office versus by the board itself?
I don't have that number in front of me, but I can get that for you. I would say probably 60% by the office, if not more than that.
If you could get that, I'd appreciate it.
Yep, happy to.
I think iWork will also be fantastic for us because it's cloud-based. It's going to put power of the use of it in the hands of the public, but it'll also allow us to do much better data management with regards to the permitting process, the amount of the investment, applications, nuisance complaints, unsafe structures. It's going to really transform how that office works, and it'll take it from a manually paper-driven process to something that's more automated. And as you can tell, tremendous amount of volume of work goes through this 4.5, now 5.5 person office. Tremendous amount of work, and also through the volunteer committees with our zoning board, plan commission, PACE committee, historic board, that all work very closely with building and planning.
Yeah, and one of the benefits too, including improving our process, anybody in the public will be able to look up an application by address and see, did they go through historic board like they should have, or do they have a building permit? So it's just going to help the general flow of information. Thank you.
Tony, I'd like to introduce, for those of you who may not know, our new Director of Economic Development, Tony Steinhardt.
Good evening. I'd like to just acknowledge and thank each of you for taking some time to meet with me. Patrick, I haven't got on your calendar yet, but we will do that here shortly. I'm meeting with educators, industrialists, RDC, and City Council, and elected officials in the county to get their insights on economic development, past and present, and future. So we'll be doing that over the next few weeks. We're currently working with 4 local industries on $100+ million of capital investment that are being considered here in Jefferson County and Madison, and look forward to working with those over the next few weeks. We also have some exciting news, I think, that will be able to be discussed about the Madison Plaza Shopping Center here in the next few weeks, as the mayor and I will be meeting with the developer again on Thursday to conclude, we hope, some of those conversations. So some exciting stuff should be forthcoming here shortly for the Madison Plaza. From an economic development information perspective, it's my hope as we start to get organized within that department to be more transparent, both on the website as well as with yourselves and the RDC, and we're working on some reporting mechanisms to do that in the near future. Any questions?
Just to reemphasize what it's doing, which is bringing a tremendous amount of organization already to economic development and working with our redevelopment commission and with our work plans, priorities. We have the Ready Grant process that's also really starting to amp up. The Southern Indiana RDA will have their February meeting here in City of Madison Council Chambers in February. And we'll start learning exactly what are going to be the conditions under which IEDC is going to release the $50 million of grant funds that our RDA was awarded, part of which included our destination plan and Hanover College's partnership with Ivy Tech for their vet tech clinic. So a lot going on.
And once we understand that process, then we'll be able to start to prioritize the dollars needed for those matches as well as the priorities in each project. So the next quarter should be quite exciting for both for lots of projects.
Thanks, John. Okay, moving on, we have no bills on third reading or second reading. Let's go to public comments. If there's anybody here in the audience who wishes to address the mayor's office and city council, ask you to come to the podium now and introduce yourself and give us your name and address. Oh, so Scrooge had to come.
Ah! Are there no prisons?
How you doing, Bob?
Good. Bob Hartsaw, and sorry about the Scrooge, but it's fun at Christmas time. I came because I wanted to hear the parking study, but I did hear a discussion of the trash and the problems there, and I'd like to underline again that those issues are very similar to water issues, and that over 16% of households in this community are single person households, and they're subsidizing between water, sewer, and trash approximately 50% of that bill. So there are some issues with those rate structures, and I'd like for you to please consider those as you go through that next process, because it is expensive, it's time consuming, but I think there's some fairness issues that will look at. So, thank you. Ha!
Thank you very much. Anybody else? All right, well, we'll close with just a few comments from me. I'd like to announce that we will have our State of the City address on February the 24th, which is the last Thursday of February. Location still to be determined, but we should have that hopefully nailed down in the next, hopefully by the end of this week. We will also, at that State of the City, talk about highlights from the last year, but more importantly, what we're doing in 2022. And we will also be, I think, unveiling a new series that we're going to use to communicate with you and the community called Madison on the Move. And so we have been actually in production on the first segment of that series, which is on our blight elimination strategy and the impact it's having across the community. So we're excited about that. We talked a little bit about water. We're still refining the rate study, so we have met with our consultants again. As you know, for the last 8 months, we have been also talking to Jefferson County Council, Jefferson County Commissioners. We are injecting those conversations into the rate study, but hopefully by the end of this week we'll have a near final version. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear that we should be very optimistic about a meaningful financial contribution by the county, and our rate study will reflect that. want to also give my condolences to the family and to the community with regard to the passing of Mrs. Eisenhart. You probably saw that on the news. Her funeral is this week, but she was one of our iconic coaches and members of our community, and it was great to see so many stories that people across the community shared about Mrs. Eisenhart, including myself and many of you as well. And then also I want to give a note of thanks to Emily Roberts, the Chamber of City of Madison, Madison Area Chamber of Commerce Director, who has announced her resignation to pursue not only additional education, but accepting a leadership position within a nonprofit, unfortunately outside the city of Madison. But she has assured us that her heart is in Madison and she wants to come back here eventually and make additional contributions. But those are my notes. And finally, I'll mention too that today in the Board of Public Works, we approved an agreement with Historic Madison Inc. with regards to the transfer of property at the corner of Vaughn Drive and Poplar Street. The City of Madison entered into an agreement for that property in July of 2019. We've gone through some evaluations of what we can do with that space, and then the city as well as Historic Madison were amenable to some modifications so that that project could be turned into very attractive green space and also contribute to the investment we intend to make along Vaughn Drive as an extension of the development plans for Bicentennial Park. So we'll be inking that agreement this week. That will prompt the documentation of the transfer, but this is at the very, very corner of Poplar and Vaughn. It's a large and wooded lot that is going to be turned into very attractive green space and also contribute to the investment that not only the city has made, but also private investors have made along that corridor, but certainly Historic Madison with their significant investment in the Shrewsbury Wendell House and the Hyatt Talbot House there. That whole corridor is, again, another pocket of Madison that has seen tremendous amount of investment, and our co-investment down there, I think, is really meaningful. So happy that that is now about to be documented, and we'll get to work on improving the streetscape for that whole area down there. Our next council meeting is Tuesday, February the 8th. Happy to answer any additional questions. Lots always going on across the city. If not, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second the motion.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Good night, everybody. Thanks again. Thanks everybody for coming too. Good program.
Hey, Joe, I watched her.
Got a question. What is the transfer in there?